Welcome to another Pondering in a Psalm, which today is a second look at Psalm 89. In the first main section of this psalm, which I've described as "Great is your faithfulness," Ethan the Ezrahite waxes lyrical about the faithfulness of God. We saw the flow of his argument in verses 1 to 4. God's faithfulness is expounded by the psalmist. In verses 5 to 8, God's faithfulness is extolled in the heavens. Verses 9 to 18, God's faithfulness is exercised on earth. And that all builds up to the main heart of this psalm, which is from verse 19 through to verse 37. God's faithfulness is expressed in his covenant to David. And that lays the background, that's the heart of the problem that exercises Ethan the psalmist, and which he wrestles with in the second main section of this psalm, the theme of which is summed up in verse 49. Where is your faithfulness? Where is your faithfulness? That's the question that is troubling Ethan. Great is your faithfulness, but where is it at this moment in time? Where is it now? The setting for this cry of anguish seems to be the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 586 BC. Events which led to the deportation of the Jews into exile in Babylon for 7 decades. And Ethan looks around him from verse 38 onwards in particular, and he sees the devastation on every side. It's the same scene witnessed and referred to in the early verses of Psalm 79. It's the same scene that Jeremiah laments over in the Lamentations book. So now there is no Jerusalem, there's no temple, there's no king on the throne. So what of God's faithfulness to his covenant to David? Remember how we read in verses 3 and 4 of Psalm 89, and again from 19 onwards. God made a covenant with David that he will still hold fast even if the people sin, and even if he has to discipline them. He will not violate his covenant. That's what he said. There will always be a descendant of David on the throne of Israel. And the cause of the trouble here is God himself. Look at verses 38 to 45. Again and again, Ethan says to God, you have done this. In fact, in verse 39, he says, you have renounced the covenant. You have treated with disdain the covenant that you made. You've spurned the covenant. All this disaster is attributed to God himself. And Ethan simply can't make sense of it. And so he voices the age-old, often repeated cry of the suffering and persecuted believer, including the souls of the martyrs under the altar in Revelation. How long, O Lord? Verse 46. How long? And Ethan has another reason for his sense of urgency as he pleads with God, as it were, to explain how all this is not a violation of his true faithfulness. Look at what he says from verse 47. In effect, he says, I'm getting old, and death is inevitable and unavoidable. And I need to know the answer to this question. Where is your faithfulness before I die? However, the truth is that Ethan didn't live to see the answer to his prayer, which ultimately came with the birth of Jesus, David's greater son, and the continuation of the Davidic dynasty as promised by God. And I'm sure that perhaps in less dramatic circumstances, many of us have struggled to make sense of God's actions. They don't seem to fit in with our understanding of things. And so we long to make sense of them and cry out to God, where is your faithfulness? What are you doing in all this? Now, friends, there's nothing wrong with asking such a question. After all, we're thinking it anyway. As long as it doesn't arise from an unbelief that demands that God justify his actions. But it is the honest cry of the child of God who, because of our limited sight and our limited understanding, we're struggling to make sense of what God is doing. And you see, the problem, at least it's a problem to us, is that God doesn't run by our timetable. His ways are not our ways. His timings are not our timings. And sometimes he keeps us waiting a very long time, if an answer comes at all. And sometimes we have to press on with life, and even life without the answer. We have to live by faith. And faith involves believing that what God says He will do, even if not in a way that suits us or in a time span that we would prefer. And in such times, what we need to do is believe our beliefs and doubt our doubts. You see, we believe that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. We believe with the first part of this psalm that His faithfulness is established and unbreakable. So we believe that belief and hold on to it, but we doubt our doubts, the questions that arise in our minds. Because if God is utterly faithful and trustworthy, then the fact that we can't make sense of things doesn't alter that fact. And if He so chooses, He will give us an answer and some sort of explanation. And if He so chooses not to, well, that's what's best for us. And we have to press on in faith and in trust. And remember Jeremiah. What did he say as he sat in the rubble of Jerusalem? As he sat with tears running down his cheeks and his heart as broken as the city and its people. This is what he said: "Great is your faithfulness." And remember, the answer ultimately longed for by Ethan. All the promises of God are yes and amen in Jesus. The Lord bless you and the Lord keep you.